The automotive industry is preparing for a change unlike anything it has experienced in nearly a century. It's not a disruption in the conventional sense, or a technological leap that reshapes the competitive landscape while leaving the fundamental structure intact. Rather, it's a genuine purge, a reduction. It will leave behind fewer brands and manufacturers and dispel the illusion that mere presence is enough to survive in a market that no longer rewards it. This is not speculation. The mechanics are already in motion. What appears from the outside to be a slow drift toward electrification and software-defined vehicles and stricter emissions mandates and tightening capital requirements is, in fact, a stress test of historic proportions. Many brands that have existed for decades, sold millions of vehicles, and become part of the cultural fabric of entire regions are failing this test. This will only become obvious when it is too late to correct course. The curious thing about industrial collapse is that it doesn't announce itself. Rather, it unfolds gradually in the form of quarterly reports showing slightly thinner margins, market share eroding by fractions of a percentage point, factories running at lower capacity, and engineering budgets trimmed just enough to avoid alarm. The companies themselves continue to operate. They continue to launch new models. They continue to advertise. Because the machinery of production is vast, capital-intensive, and embedded in supply chains, employment networks, and regional economies, the decline can persist for years before anyone acknowledges it. However, the underlying reality is unforgiving. The rules that governed the automotive industry for most of the past century, the assumptions that allowed a brand to survive simply by achieving scale, optimizing production efficiency, and competing on cost and volume, are no longer sufficient. In fact, they may be liabilities. Consider the logic that dominated the industry for so long. If you produced enough vehicles, spread your fixed costs across a large enough base, negotiated favorable terms with suppliers, and achieved economies of scale in manufacturing, you could survive on thin margins. Profitability was a function of volume. Growth was the answer to every problem. If sales slowed, you expanded into new markets. If margins compressed, you increased production. The assumption was that size itself was a form of protection. While this was never entirely true, it was true enough for long enough that it became doctrine. Thus, the industry organized itself around this principle. Brands proliferated. Manufacturers merged, acquired, and created sprawling portfolios of nameplates, each targeting a slightly different segment. They justified this approach by believing that having more products in more categories across more geographies would insulate the parent company from risk. However, volume is not the same as resilience. In fact, in the current environment, volume may be the opposite of resilience. The transition to electrification is more than just swapping one powertrain for another. Rather, it requires a complete restructuring of the industry's cost base, supply chain, engineering priorities, and capital requirements. Electric vehicles require a fundamentally different set of competencies: battery chemistry, thermal management, software integration, power electronics. Legacy manufacturers do not inherently have advantages in these areas. In many cases, they are areas where these manufacturers are at a structural disadvantage because their organizations were optimized for different problems. The capital intensity is extreme. Developing a competitive electric vehicle platform requires billions of dollars in upfront investment. Securing or building battery production capacity requires billions more. Updating factories, retraining workers, and managing the transition while continuing to produce internal combustion vehicles to fund the transformation all require resources that many manufacturers lack or cannot justify deploying given the uncertainty of returns. The result is a bifurcation. Only a few companies can afford to make the necessary investments, those with deep capital reserves, strong pricing power, and the ability to command premium margins. They can absorb losses during the transition period. They can iterate and refine until the economics work. However, for the rest, the brands that survive on thin margins, depend on volume, and lack pricing power because they primarily compete on cost, the math does not work. They cannot afford the transition. Yet they cannot afford not to attempt it because regulatory mandates in Europe, China, and California are making internal combustion vehicles progressively more difficult and expensive to sell. This is the trap, and it is not a temporary condition, it is structural. There is a deeper issue, one that goes beyond the mechanics of electrification. It has to do with the difference between brands that sell transportation and brands that sell meaning. For decades, the industry was able to thrive by selling transportation. Reliable, affordable, functionally adequate vehicles that moved people from one place to another. This was enough. The market was large, demand was stable, and the competition was primarily on price and features. If you could produce a vehicle that was good enough at a price that was competitive, you could build a viable business. But as markets mature, as consumers become wealthier, as the functional utility of the product becomes commoditized, the competitive dynamic shifts. It is no longer enough to be good enough. The brands that survive, that thrive, are the ones that offer something beyond transportation. They offer identity, aspiration, a narrative that justifies a price premium. This is not a new phenomenon. Luxury brands have always operated on this principle, but what is changing is the degree to which this principle is spreading across the entire market. Even in the mass market, even among buyers who are price sensitive, there is a growing preference for brands that carry meaning, that signal something about the owner, that offer an emotional or social return on the investment. And this is where many legacy brands are vulnerable. They were built to sell transportation. Their engineering is competent. Their manufacturing is efficient, but they lack narrative control. They lack the cultural capital that would allow them to charge more, to command loyalty, to survive a downturn in demand without resorting to discounts that erode margins further. Contrast this with the brands that have managed to build meaning into their identity. They do not compete on price. They do not need to. Their customers are willing to pay more, often significantly more, because the product represents something beyond its functional attributes. And because of this, these brands have pricing power. They have margin. They have the financial flexibility to invest, to weather disruptions, to adapt. This is not a moral judgment. It is simply an observation about how markets allocate resources over time. Capital flows toward the companies that generate returns. And in an industry where the cost of entry is rising, where the margin for error is shrinking, where the ability to command a premium is increasingly tied to intangible assets like brand perception and narrative coherence, the companies that lack these assets are at a profound disadvantage. The illusion is that all of this can be managed, that brands can be repositioned, that marketing campaigns can create emotional resonance, that heritage and history can be leveraged to build the kind of meaning that justifies premium pricing. And to some extent, this is possible, but it is slow, expensive, and uncertain. And in a market that is moving quickly, that is being reshaped by new entrants who understand the importance of narrative from the beginning, the legacy brands are always playing catch-up. There is also the question of efficiency. The industry has spent decades optimizing for efficiency, lean manufacturing, just-in-time supply chains, modular platforms that allow multiple models to be built on the same architecture. All of this has driven costs down and allowed manufacturers to operate on thinner margins. But efficiency is fragile. A system optimized for efficiency is a system with no slack, no redundancy, no capacity to absorb shocks. When the supply chain is disrupted, when a key component becomes unavailable, when demand shifts unexpectedly, the entire system seizes. And in an environment where disruptions are becoming more frequent, where the transition to electrification is creating new dependencies and new vulnerabilities, the most efficient companies are often the most fragile. This is counterintuitive. Efficiency is supposed to be a virtue, and in stable environments it is, but stability is not guaranteed. And when the environment shifts, when the rules change, the companies that survive are not necessarily the most efficient. They are the ones with the resources to adapt, the flexibility to change course, the margin to make mistakes and recover. The automotive industry is entering a period of profound instability. The transition to electrification, the rise of software-defined vehicles, the entry of new competitors from the technology sector, the tightening of emissions regulations, the increasing importance of data and connectivity. All of these forces are converging, and they are creating an environment where the old playbook no longer applies. In this environment, the number of brands that can survive is smaller than the number that currently exist. This is not a failure of any individual company. It is a mathematical reality. The market cannot support the current level of fragmentation. There are too many brands chasing too few customers, Too many manufacturers competing on too little differentiation. Too many companies operating on margins too thin to fund the necessary investments in new technologies. Consolidation is inevitable. Some brands will be absorbed into larger entities. Some will be shuttered quietly, their assets liquidated, their nameplates retired. Some will linger in diminished form, selling fewer vehicles at lower margins in shrinking markets, until the decision to exit becomes unavoidable. What is striking is how long this process can take. The automotive industry is not like software, where a company can collapse in a matter of months. The capital is too large, the infrastructure too embedded, the political and economic stakes too high. Governments will intervene to delay closures. Unions will negotiate to preserve jobs. Manufacturers will restructure, divest, and reorganize, extracting every possible concession to postpone the final reckoning. But delay is not avoidance. The fundamental economics do not change, and eventually the market corrects. It always does. Excess capacity is eliminated. Brands that no longer serve a purpose disappear. Resources are reallocated to the companies that can generate returns. This cleanup is not something that will happen suddenly. It is already happening. It has been happening for years, in small, almost imperceptible ways. A brand that used to sell 1 million vehicles now sells 800,000. A factory that used to run 3 shifts now runs 2. An engineering team that used to develop new platforms now shares them with sister brands to cut costs. These are not headlines. They are footnotes in quarterly earnings reports. But they are the early indicators of a process that, once it reaches a certain threshold, becomes irreversible. The brands that will survive are the ones that understand that the game has changed, that volume is no longer enough, that efficiency without margin is a path to fragility, that meaning matters more than metal, that resilience, not growth, is the measure of strength. And the brands that will disappear are the ones that continue to operate as if the old rules still apply, as if scale alone can ensure survival, as if the transition to electrification is simply an engineering challenge rather than an existential reckoning. The market does not care about legacy. It does not care about heritage. It does not care about the jobs that will be lost or the communities that will be disrupted. It cares about returns. And when a company can no longer generate returns, when the cost of keeping it alive exceeds the value it creates, the market withdraws its support. This is not cruelty. It is simply how capital works. And in an industry as capital-intensive as automotive, where the barriers to entry are high, but the barriers to exit are even higher, the cleanup, when it comes, is brutal and thorough. What we are witnessing is the beginning of that cleanup. The industry is too large, too fragmented, too reliant on assumptions that no longer hold. And over the next decade, it will contract, not by choice, but by necessity. Not because any individual actor wills it, but because the structure of the market demands it. Some brands will vanish, others hollow out. A few grow stronger as the coming cleanup reshapes autos.